Hey, Laurie, welcome to the Rion Talks podcast. I appreciate you being here.
A pleasure being with you here today.
So, what are some of the basic things that we should really know about sex and about intimacy that just because of the taboo surrounding the topics, we're not really taught by our parents or we're not really taught in school?
That's a very big question because it really depends on where you live. It depends
Mhm.
on what your culture is. It depends on, sometimes even in North America, it depends on which state you live in. There's a lot of missing information. I don't want to say just misinformation, but missing information. It also depends how old you are, because I do believe that sex education is not just for youth. It's for all ages. I think older people are missing a lot of information about aging and sexuality. They don't know too much. So even though we have the internet and, you can Google away, you don't always know what your source is going to be and stuff like that. So, and if we're talking about youth, part of the problem is that before they even start talking about sex in school, for those that are lucky to have it, kids are getting their information from porn. And, they're curious. Kids are naturally curious. So they're going to type in, boobies and whatever, penis or sex. And what are they going to get when they type that? They're going to get porn sites and what have you. So, and then they grow up on that thinking that this is what sex is, right? So I was just talking to a guy who told me he started watching porn at 9 years old. 9 years old. And he watched it for years and years and years and years. So he didn't have any other knowledge to back up that's not what real sex is. So that's unfortunately a big problem when people go there to look, because it sets us up for unrealistic expectations, of how we should perform, how our partner should react to our performance, what we should look like, what our partner should look like. So, and the sex acts, thinking that this is what women like you see all kinds of things on porn that if you ask women, do you like to be, whatever it is, many will say absolutely not. Not that it's the same across the board, but for the most part, no. So, but if you don't know that, you think, and if all you're watching is that, you think, yeah, all women like cum on their face. Yeah, all women like double penetration. Yeah, all women love anal sex. Like, you just get that sense. So that's a big part of it. So in terms of education, we need to make kids porn literate. In other words, we have to get them to be critical thinkers of what they're watching. Like, get them to ask questions. Do you think these people consent? And do you think this is what people like? And what do you think is different from this to real life? Like, they need to understand this is a movie. They need to understand this is fantasy. When they watch movies like The Fast and the Furious, that's not how you drive a car in real life. So it's the exact same thing. That's the equivalent of that. So we have to make kids more porn literate. We also have to go beyond the scare tactics, right? Like if you have sex, you might get pregnant, or if you have sex, you'll get these terrible diseases, and then you show pictures of all these terrible diseases, and that's not enough. Like, kids are going to have sex anyway. And the main reason children or teenagers, the average age is about 16 and a half for first sex. The main reason they have sex is because it feels good, which is normal, right? So you would expect that any education should involve some measure of discussion of pleasure, and letting girls know, for example, that no, it's not normal for intercourse to hurt every single time. Or yes, it is normal for men to sometimes lose their erection or to come too fast occasionally, or what have you. So we need to be able to have these discussions about pleasure, about orgasm. We need to have conversations about consent. Very, very important to be able to teach what actual consent is. It's not just a yes or a no. It has to be about giving enthusiastic consent. It's about knowing that you can't consent if you're drunk, like all of these things. So these are discussions that must be had.
No, that is great, and especially the porn aspect and the porn teaching you is something I went through. I know I started watching porn at a very early age, like at 13, and I watched it for like 2 years. And then when I had my first sexual relationship, it wasn't what I expected. So so that's when I started to question, like, okay, there's something wrong here. There's definitely something weird with this porn thing. And I stopped watching porn for like 5 years. But I don't know why I came to that conclusion, but it would have been nice to know prior to that first encounter.
But you see, you're a smart man. You thought about it. You realize something is off. This doesn't seem right. So you questioned it. That makes you more, that's what we want to get kids to do, is question what you are watching, right? And then the problem also becomes for a lot of people who are, let's say, do a lot of porn watching and masturbation, when they end up with a partner, they might not be able to orgasm in the same way. Like it might just not happen because they're so used to a different kind of stimulation that just having one body next to you, like when you're used to watching like threesomes and moresomes and all kinds of stuff, it's not as stimulating to the brain, right? So there's an adjustment. And so there are some people who do suffer from that. Not everybody. And I'm not, porn it has its place in society, but we also have to know that there are some people who use it problematically, just like there are casinos in the world and there are some problem gamblers. It's the same thing. So it's not, the porn is not the big bad wolf. It's the those who use that as their addiction. That becomes a different issue.
So where should we be really getting our information and asking those questions that we have in terms of intimacy and in terms of sex?
Well, listen, I encourage, especially for youth, I encourage parents to learn how to talk to their kids about sex, learn what is age appropriate, learn how to have that conversation. But I'm also realistic. A lot of people did not grow up with that. They don't have the language. They can't attend workshops necessarily easily and what have you. But there are resources online. There are good books like How to Talk to Your Teenager About Sex or How to Talk to Your Kids About Sex. So parents can get that information. They have to want to do it. So for me, it's about motivating parents, not just to depend on the school, because some schools do it, some don't. I don't know what your school is all about, but whatever it is, I think people have to also look, if they're going to look online, like Google search things, there's a lot of information online. There's a lot of good information as well. Like go to a source that's qualified. So what training do they have? What's their background? Are they professionals, or are they just simply just bloggers who want to write about their own experiences in the topic or what have you? So if you really want that, then go to that kind of source. Now, because of that, about 5 or 6 years ago, I did join up with Pornhub, which is the biggest porn company in the world, where we created a sexual education site on Pornhub. So it's called the Sexual Wellness Center. And I wanted to join them because I wanted to reach as many people as possible with quality information. So if you go to that site, there are thousands of pages of information written by only professionals in the field. So it's all by professionals. It's all science-based. It's all like what we call evidence-based information. And we cover everything from the most basic to the most, extreme sexual practices. So that's, now we created that space for people who are already going to pornography. This is not something that we do not publicize this to the general public. This is for, we're not driving people to that site. It's there so that you get the balance.
Mm. So, talk to me a little bit more about this balance because obviously, with porn, we see the intense lust and the sex, but we're not really taught about intimacy. What should we know about intimacy, and what's the difference between sex and intimacy?
Well, they're two different things. So, sex is if we just look at pure sex, we're talking about the physical nature of sex. So, you can have a casual sexual encounter that is not intimate at all. Intimacy is about mutual vulnerability. If you break down the word intimacy, into me, see, into me you see, I'm opening the window into my soul so you can look into me. So it's that sharing of deeper things with a partner. It involves beyond sex, like affection and having deep conversations and mutual respect and things like that. So intimacy is vital in a relationship, and it's far more important than the sexes. And when the two are combined together is when you usually get the best experience, especially for people, if you're in a relationship, that's what you want. If your relationship lacks intimacy, you can have great sex and no intimacy. Your relationship won't necessarily be viable over the long term. So that intimacy is really important because when you have that with somebody, there's a level of safety that you feel with them. And you feel like you can be yourself. You feel like you can be honest with your feelings and things like that. And I often tell this to men who suffer from like performance anxiety. When they get into new relationships or someone they really like, they can't get it up, and it's in their head. It's not physical, but it's because of that safety. Usually that problem absolutely goes away when they start to make connections with that person, start to feel safe with that person, feeling like they can be vulnerable. And then usually that problem disappears because of that.
Yeah, this performance anxiety in young people is tied to the psychological aspects of things, right?
Absolutely. Yes, performance anxiety is all psychological. It's all based on fears, like things that go on in our heads. Usually men who suffer from performance anxiety tend to be anxious in general. So they're anxious about their performance. How am I going to do? Is she going to like me? Am I going to get hard enough? Am I going to come too fast? What if I don't come? What if I come too fast? What if she thinks I'm not big enough? So all the what if creates this anxiety in us. And when a person experiences anxiety, their bodies go into a fight or flight response mode. So our bodies do this naturally to fight off fear. So when we're afraid, think back to the cavemen when if there was this, saber-toothed tiger coming to kill us, right away we'd be like, oh my God, I'm scared. And then the blood flows to your legs so you can run away, or into your other vital organs so you can beat it. So we did this. Our bodies do that naturally. The problem is, so now we're not afraid of saber-toothed tigers. We're just afraid of performance. We're afraid. We create the fear in ourselves. But our brain does not distinguish from those two things. So what happens is, once you start doing the what if, and I'm scared, and oh my God, your body then goes into this fight or flight response. So all the blood that was flowing into your penis is now going into your vital organs. It leaves your penis and goes to the vital organs to be able to fight off whatever fear it is. So that becomes a bit problematic. And that creates the performance like the erectile dysfunction with performance anxiety, because that's essentially what we're talking about. So yes, it's erectile dysfunction that is psychological in nature.
It would be very weird if we got boners every time we got scared or something like that. Thanks God. So you're saying that this performance anxiety, this erectile dysfunction, is fixed once we have that intimacy and once we have that trust in the other person.
Oftentimes, look, nothing is ever that simple in sexuality. So it's my job as someone who works with people who have sexual problems is to figure out where the fear lies. Where is the anxiety? Sometimes it could be a fear of getting somebody pregnant, or a fear of catching a disease, or a fear of being a bad person because I'm having sex outside marriage. Or everybody has a story. Everybody has their own ways of thinking, and we have to just figure out what those fears are, and then we have to talk about them in such a way so that we make it rational, right? Because fears are generally irrational.
So turning that fear from irrational to rational.
Right. And then be able to confront it properly at that point, and make sure you have the evidence to back it up. Like, why are you afraid? Like, what is going to happen? What if you protect it? Like, there's all kinds of things that it's not just so simple as just get comfortable in a relationship. That's a big part of it. For some men, that's what holds them back, is that fear of vulnerability. That's for some men. For other men, it's other fears.
No, that's very interesting. And I do want to come back to this point of vulnerability. And I want to ask you, let's say someone goes through intimate relationship and they have a very bad breakup, and then they have trouble getting back that intimacy with someone else. Is intimacy something that can be learned, that can be taught?
Yes, of course. Absolutely. I think, look, you're talking about some people who have broken up. Heartbreak is difficult. Sometimes we're betrayed, so we don't trust. Like, oh my God, I'm scared now. I don't want to fall in love again. I don't want to hurt like this anymore, and whatever. You need to understand that is life. If you want to love, you gotta hurt. Like, you have to take the risk of getting hurt. If you don't take the risk, you just won't love anybody. And then what? You'll just be a lonely person. So, I mean, it's fine for people who decide they want to be single and are perfectly happy, but it's not, most people, it's their fear that gets in the way, and they're not so happy. They're quite lonely, in fact. So you also don't want to make the entire gender, whichever side is on, pay for one person's betrayal of you, right? So not every, one guy cheats on you, not all guys are cheaters, things like that. So, but sometimes you have to work through it. Sometimes it takes time. It takes time to grieve. It takes time to understand. Some people need the closure, need to understand what went wrong, and which is a little harder to do in our day and age, because now with all the technology, there's too much ghosting. So it's like people just kind of disappear, and that's not cool.
So what is the most common problem that you see in your practice regarding relationships? Is it cheating, or is it something else?
I do see quite a bit of infidelity, but the couples who come to me are willing to work on their relationship and work past it. So that's one thing. I think the most common problem is a desire discrepancy. So when one person wants a lot more sex than another person, and that creates problems in the relationship. And part of that, unfortunately, is not quite understanding how desire works in long-term relationships. I actually did a TED Talk on this. I think it's a very important topic to talk about desire, especially, I'm going to say women, but it's not just women. Some men also experience this, but where over time, the desire becomes less spontaneous and more responsive, meaning they may not get as horny as they did before, but that doesn't mean they enjoy sex less or less interested. It just means that the desire needs to be triggered. So, and not just triggered by some visual display, but like through stimulation. So they need to be aroused before the desire kind of kicks in. So if we understand how our bodies function a little bit, then that will help us as well. And understanding too that there are many factors that affect desire. So at the beginning of a relationship, everything is great. Like you don't have too many worries. You just want, every time you see each other, you have sex. It's great, wonderful. Then you get married, you move in together. Now you have to worry about a house and paying a mortgage, and then you have kids, and then you have to worry about this. And life gets really, can get really complicated compared to the beginnings of a relationship. And that affects desire, like stress and money issues and relationship issues and conflicts, and is all going to affect desire. So it's just understanding how it works can help us not blame each other so much, and maybe have a little more compassion for each other.
So what I'm understanding is that while you're in that honeymoon stage, that I don't know how long it is. I've heard like 6 to like 1.5, 6 months, 6 to 18 months. You are very horny. You really don't have any trouble getting in the mood. But then specifically women and some men, after that honeymoon period, need more stimulation, need a little bit more role play, and they need to choose to have sex. It's not as spontaneous anymore.
Exactly. Absolutely. And the conditions, of course, you're choosing within the conditions. So the conditions have to be right. But that's very well said how you said it. That yes, they need to have the conditions have to be right. They may lose that spontaneous desire, or it may not happen as often. It may happen when they're on vacation, or it may happen at certain times of the month. But for the most part, it needs to be triggered. And yeah, so that's something that just that little bit of understanding can go a long way, actually.
And is it very common for people to think that when they're out of this stage, they've fallen out of love?
Yeah, good point. That's a very good point. So sometimes, yes, sometimes people will say things like, I love my partner, but I'm not in love with them. And I hate that saying, because you cannot stay in love in that the way you understand in love forever. It's actually the in lust phase. You call it the honeymoon period. I call it the in lust phase. You're in lust with your partner. Love is a deeper feeling. Love is beyond, like goes beyond that feeling. So if you love your partner, then what you're saying is, I no longer have the oomph to have so much sex with my partner, but it doesn't mean that I don't think my partner is beautiful or whatever. So now we have to figure out, okay, well, what is blocking this, right? What is blocking the attraction or the desire to have sex? So we need to start understanding what it is, right?
So when we have sex, especially, well, all the time with a partner, should we be talking about it? Should we be asking questions? Should it be more spontaneous? How should we go about it?
So again, it depends what stage of life you're in. So if you're, you've got young kids and you have very little time and both are working, and spontaneous is difficult, right? Sometimes you got to get out of the house or go rent a hotel room. Like you got to do things to make it happen, because we tend to get sometimes very complacent about it. And we always say, oh, let's just do it tomorrow. And then tomorrow comes, and then another tomorrow. And next thing you know, it's been 6 months of tomorrows. So you have to put it on your schedule. If that's happening, then you need to make it a priority to spend couple time together, not just sex, but couple time together. So it's not just about the spontaneity part. You have to, and you talked about talking. Sexual communication is important. Where each of us are responsible for our own pleasure. Meaning that if we don't tell our partner what feels good for us, we should not have expectations that they're going to do things that are right for us. If we can't open our mouth and say, no, this is not what I like this, or could you do more of that? And that changes over time too. Like what feels good at one age may not feel as good later on. So it is important to keep that communication open. And the best lovers are those that care about how their partner is experiencing sex, are those that take the time to say, I want to give you pleasure. You tell me what's good. You tell me what feels good for you, and let's explore that together.
So let's say you're in a one night stand situation, and obviously there's no vulnerability there. It's more the sex lust side, no intimacy. So I know that, for example, I've heard, correct me if I'm wrong, that the clitoris is like, that woman, like 85% of women can't orgasm without you actually stimulating the clitoris. So what are some tips like that if you have someone that doesn't really communicate, or you're like in a one night stand situation, that a guy or girl can follow in order to improve the experience?
Right. It's interesting because I had a conversation with a gentleman who said to me he has a lot of casual sex. And I said, like, what happens is, well, I hook up with women. I don't have intercourse with them. They just give me blowjobs. And I said, they come over just to give you a blowjob, and do you pay for it? And he said, no, they don't. I don't even pay for it. And I said, well, what do they get out of it? Like, what do you do to them? Like, I asked him, do you give them pleasure? And he says, no. So, sometimes in casual sexual relationships, it might just be because you want to get off and you don't care so much what you do to the other person. And if they don't tell you, do this to me, you won't. But generally, if you are interested in pleasuring women, yes, focus on the foreplay. It isn't about the intercourse. It's about everything else that you do. So spend a good 15, 20 minutes caressing and playing with the clitoris and oral sex and kissing and doing the things that most women do enjoy, right? If you're just going to be selfish, then she'll pick up on that, and it'll be up to her to decide, do I want to see this guy again, or don't I want to see this guy again?
And I want to switch completely from, the lust side to the more spiritual side of sex. I've heard practices like tantric sex that I don't really know what they're about. And I would love for you to shine a light on the more spiritual side of sex.
Look, I'm no big expert in tantric anything. I think for a lot of people, sex is a spiritual experience, right? And the reason why, because we can feel it at our deep soul level when we, not all the time necessarily with a partner, but ultimately some people will describe it as a religious experience or a spiritual experience. Now, in some religions and cultures, that's exactly what it is. When, in Judaism, for example, when you having sex with your partner is supposed to elevate you in God's eyes and what have you. So, and in many other cultures, I'm sure it's the same kind of thing. So it's there as a spiritual connection. It's not just meant to wham, bam, thank you, goodbye, right? Both are supposed to enjoy it, and both are supposed to connect through the experience of sex. And when you think about it, when we orgasm, we are at our most vulnerable. We're at our most open, really. And so it can feel that way. Some people, it's a flood of emotions, right? Some people will cry after sex, for example. It just opens up that emotional floodgate simply because we're at our most vulnerable. So it can feel very deep. When you talk about tantric sex, it's a philosophy for sure, which I'm not going to go into, but like people can incorporate tantric practices, which is about slowing everything down, which is about connecting with your partner. Like there's an exercise where you're each touching each other's heart, for example. Like you feel that it's about connecting more than the orgasm. And it's about prolonging that connection, prolonging that level of ecstasy or connection. That it's the journey that's more important than the result or the destination.
And how can we really prolong that connection, as you're saying?
Well, prolong the sex, prolong the, like, it's a big question. I'm not sure what you
Yeah.
mean.
Make it more, instead of just focusing, on the outcome. Do you know any techniques that we can use, like touching each other's hearts, or techniques like that, where you can make it more intimate and more of a connection rather than just sex?
So spending a lot of time making eye contact, for example, right? So there's a tendency when we have sex with someone to close our eyes. It becomes a very personal experience. And it's true, when you're in that pleasure zone, you're in your own body, you're really for yourself, okay? And there's nothing wrong with that. However, if you want a deeper experience, try doing this while keeping your eyes open, while keeping that connection visually with your partner. Caressing is a nice way. Like, it doesn't have to be sexual. It can just be about caressing the body, even just holding each other naked together and feeling your hearts together, and hearing the heartbeat of your partner, for example. These are all things you can do, but there are people who specialize in this. There are workshops for people who want to explore this. There are books. There's book tantric sex for dummies. Like, there are things that people can learn, and specific exercises if they want to deepen their connection.
So we've been talking a lot about sex in this podcast, but I know that obviously sex is not even. How much would you say sex is? Like, what percentage is sex of a meaningful and happy relationship? Like 20%, 10%, 30%? Well, how much is attributed solely to sex?
Right. You're asking me to quantify it. The problem is, when sex is a problem, let's say it's 10% of that relationship. If sex is a problem, it takes up 90% of the relationship. When it's not a problem, it doesn't take up any space. Okay. It just, so it really depends. Like, it's a hard question to answer, because there's no one way of being. Every couple creates their own norm. So if for one couple, having sex once a month works for them, and they feel completely satisfied, and they feel close, and they have all kinds of other stuff, then that's it for them. Like, that works for them. That's normal for them. So you can't really quantify it in that way. Every couple decides. But there was research, if we're going to look at like frequency, for example, there has been research done on frequency of sex and marital satisfaction, or couple satisfaction. And what they found was that couples who had sex, let's say less than once a week, were not as happy as couples who had sex more than once a week. But couples who had sex, what was it? It was like, whatever it was, is like those who had sex more than once a week were no happier than couples who had sex once a week. So it seems that once a week tends to be, but again, who are the people interviewed? What stage of life are they in? Like, there are so many factors that affect it. If you're 20 and you're in a new relationship, you're probably having sex multiple times a day. It's okay. Like, that's going to change. You have to, but accept that our sexuality, our sex drive, our frequency, all of this can evolve. So if you think that, oh, I met a girl who loves sex. Yes, of course, she loves sex, and maybe she's having so much sex right now. You're thinking, oh, great, I found somebody who loves sex as much as me, so we're going to have a great life together. That doesn't take into account the human changes that happen as we get older, or life happens, or what have you. And so sometimes I hear from guys, I feel duped. I feel like I was railroaded into this marriage. I thought I was marrying a sexual person. And so they feel like they were somehow tricked into it. And that's unfair, because that's really not how life works.
So let's say that problem does arise, that in the beginning you're having a lot of sex, and then one partner wants to keep having that much sex, but the other one has just like falling off the train. How can there really be a consensus, and how could that how can we make that not lead to even bigger problems?
Right. So you can't make your partner responsible for your sex drive. So if you want to have sex twice a day, every day, it's not just because you're in a relationship doesn't mean your partner has to fulfill your every sexual desire and what have you. And that would be unfair. That's not why we get into relationships. Okay. So I get it. It can be very frustrating for the person who wants a lot more and the other person who doesn't. That's just the way it happens to be. Like you can't force somebody, but we need to understand the lower desire, like what has reduced the desire, what's going on. Oftentimes I'll hear women, and sometimes it's women, sometimes it's men, but who will feel very pressured, and that doesn't help the situation. So you kind of have to negotiate a little bit. So the person who wants less is going to have to up their game a bit. The person who wants more is going to have to lower their number, and just, in the off, when they need more, masturbate. Like self pleasure, you have your own hand, your own best friend, you can do it. You shouldn't be making your partner responsible for your desire.
And Laurie, it's been an awesome talk. I just want to ask you a couple more questions and then give you a chance to promote your podcast and your books. But one question that I really did want to ask you was, are there any red flags, let's say you're just starting to go out with someone, that you should watch out for in other people?
Oh yeah, we could talk for hours because listen, this is this is a good way to circle back to the beginning of what we talked about. What should be taught, and what should be taught is what's a healthy relationship and an unhealthy relationship. And part of that is because if you look at the statistics, there's so much teen couple violence out there, and it's simply because we don't talk about this kind of thing. So red flags are things like a partner who is very, very jealous and says they're jealous because they love you so much. No, they're jealous because they are possessive and they're insecure. So excessive jealousy with no reason is a big red flag. Obviously, any form of abuse, physical, emotional, anybody who calls you names, anyone who tries to isolate you from your family, from your friends, who gets jealous if you go out with your friends. For example, the best relationships are the live and let live relationships. Like you do you, I'll do me, and we connect somewhere, right? It's like, I'm not going to try to control your life. You're not going to try to control me. If I'm with you, I expect you to have respect for our relationship. I expect you to have respect for me and to treat me with respect. So if you don't get that feeling, then those are some also big red flags. Somebody's history too. If you meet somebody and they tell you that they've cheated on every one of their girlfriends or boyfriends or whatever, past behavior tends to, these are patterns. And so I don't know why somebody would think they wouldn't happen to them, right? It's like, you don't have the power to change somebody else's pattern. So again, that's another red flag. I mean, there are a lot, and there's a lot of information online. If you all you have to do is Google healthy versus unhealthy relationship, and you'll get like your listings of things to look for, which young people should absolutely look at, but older people too, because we end up in dysfunctional relationships. But it's complicated simply because how we get there is complicated, right? We all have histories, we all have baggage, we all have like attachment issues. Like there's so much. And as psychologists, that's our job, is to unpack all of that so that we make all those things conscious, so that we can work through them and see how they impact the choices that we make. And it's rarely, people who say, oh, I have really bad luck in relationships. It's rarely luck that makes you fall into that kind of a pattern. So you have to ask and look in the mirror. If you see a pattern, like, how come I always end up with these assholes? Or how come I always end up with cheaters? Look in the mirror. What is it about you that is attracting those people, or that you're attracted to? Let's look at that, right? Sometimes you have to look at the common denominator.
And also, You mentioned the word that really stuck with me, trying to change the patterns of a person, trying to change someone. I feel like we should look for someone that's doing good on their own, and you yourself obviously try to do as best you can on your own, and then you can partake in a relationship without thinking that she's going to fix you or you're going to fix her or him, whoever.
One of the biggest mistakes people make is they fall in love with someone's potential. Oh, yeah, he or she has the potential to be the person I want to be with, right? No, it's like buying something as is, and you go to IKEA and you go to the section that says as is, they have cracks in them. You're buying as is. You don't take it home and then think it's going to miraculously be perfect and disappear, or that you can fix it. It won't happen. So thinking that you can fix somebody else will lead you into a life of struggle, like frustration, because you don't have that kind of power over somebody else. No matter how much you love them, you can't fix them. So, I mean, they can change on their own, of course. I believe people can change, absolutely, or I wouldn't be in this business. But it's a decision that an individual makes, not that somebody else can impose on you.
That's awesome, Laurie. So I want to open up some time for you to promote anything or to give any last words.
So I have my own podcast on sexuality. If you want to look it up, it's on all the podcast platforms. Actually, it's called Passion with Dr. Laurie. So you can look. We release an episode every week, and we talk about sexuality and relationships. And I mean, I've spent my whole career kind of talking about sexuality on the air, on radio, on TV, and things like that. So this is kind of a new avenue for me. So your support would be great. And all you have to do if you want information about either my TED Talks, my book, which is the Sex Bible for people over 50, if you're an older person, you just go to my website, which is drlaurie.com, drlaurie.com. I'm also on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, at Dr. Laurie Betito, Betito, and you can connect with me there.